I would like to welcome everybody to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Saurabh and I run the cyber research, customer success and engagement for CYFIRMA. And today I am joined with my colleague, Mr. Thomas, who's our cyber threat intelligence lead. Uh, I'm assuming people are from the western part of the world, so I would like to wish everybody good evening and good morning, depending on where you are. All right, let's get started. Uh, I think it is important for us to understand where are we in terms of when it comes to cybersecurity predictions. Now, CYFIRMA is an external threat landscape company, and we adhere to clients in different parts of the world. We are live in 5 continents. At the same time, we are working with very many industries, governments, and institutions. And based on that, we see a plethora of insights. And when we look at those insights, while we are, servicing our clients and customers, we would also like to always give back to the community of the overall cybersecurity stalwarts. So, as a matter of fact, for past many years, we have been sending out predictions of the trends that we are expecting to see or carry forward when it comes to, extrapolating what we have seen or identifying and drilling down and researching on some of the changes in the modus operandi or operations that we are able to see. We did a similar set of predictions last year in 2022, and most of our predictions actually came true. We did mention about the geopolitical space heating up and the unfortunate events either in the South China Sea or in the Russia-Ukraine conflict actually got realized. In fact, specific to the Russia-Ukraine campaign, I think my industry peers on this call or those who are not in this call would all agree that well before the first bullets or the missiles were fired, uh, a lot was happening on cyber in the cyberspace. Critical infrastructure being brought down, data being exfiltrated. You had organizations feeling the impact, whether they were MNCs operating in that geography. It was a complete mayhem, which realized, unfortunately, one of our predictions, wherein we did mention last year that cyber warfare will become the main battleground, wherein nations and states and their way of thinking will actually propagate a particular kind of warfare which will not need the missiles or bullets to be fired. And extending that further, this huge amount of data which was exfiltrated, lots of activities being observed in the underground forums, many new cyber criminal groups were popped up. Many alliances were forged. In fact, they collaborate far more than some of the cyber defenders or most of the cyber defenders who are on this call. And we saw those trends very clearly coming out, which became a nuisance for cyber defenders because now, whether you are aligning yourself to a particular way of thought, to a particular way of thinking, that itself was enough for somebody to consider you as a target. That itself was enough for your data to be exfiltrated, for your customer data, be it customer data, PII, FII, CII, anything of that nature. And the cyber criminals are getting much more advanced because they are now utilizing this data, mining this data, getting all this know-how, and they are utilizing this to possibly launch the next stage of attacks out there. And they're just not interested in stealing data and selling data. They are utilizing it for their own purposes. Also, ever since the dawn of that conflict, we have seen various AI ML, tools, techniques revolving around some of these tools, really getting propagated, which means that the cyber warfare being executed either by nation state aligned threat actors or even for that matter, a script kiddie, because the friction of or the entry barrier into cybersecurity domain in trying to induce a financial impact or a reputational impact has actually gone down. And if you look at some of the attributed statistics to what we have seen and observed in 2022, which is showcased to you on the screen, almost 3x growth of underground forums and platform users or utilization of that forum. That is where they all collaborate, which means there's a lot of activity. There is a lot of collaboration happening out there. You have increased amount of nation state influence on the cybercrime and the cybercrime syndicates and the way they operate, almost to a tune of 80% increase, with the rise in supply chain attacks being 2x, use of edge devices as crime puppets also being 2x, because these are new avenues that are being exploited by cyber criminals to get even either with your state entities or large MNCs or corporations, and basically induce reputational or financial damage. You have AI and ML being utilized almost more than 3x, and these are all conservative estimates, as well as rise in big game hunting ransomware, which has also increased 3x. So if you really look at what we have observed as an ETLM organization, as somebody who's really close in researching these indices and these indicators and insights, I think it is important for everybody to realize and understand that threats and risks originating from outside your perimeter and some of the geopolitical sentiments being driven are something that cannot be negated anytime anymore, and they have already unfortunately been realized at a larger scale, be it in the Russia Ukraine crisis, or be it in the South China Sea, or be it in any other scenario, whether it comes the post pandemic state or the ups and downs of inflation, the society being impacted depending on various behavior related attacks. Really, everything and anything is combined, because now we are all living in a global economy. We are living in a state wherein each one of us are connected digitally. Every organization is connected digitally. The supply chain is connected digitally. So the moment I am my vendor or supply chain vendor in my ecosystem is impacted, I'm impacted, because that's my weakest link. Now, this is all about what we saw in 2022, similar to what we have seen in the past and what we have predicted. I'm being joined with my colleague, as I introduced earlier, Mr. Thomas, who will now take the baton and explain to you what are those key trends that you should be looking into and that you should be considering, and why we as CYFIRMA think they are your key trends that you need to incorporate in your cybersecurity strategies or cyber posture management, so that you are not caught napping. I would hand over to Thomas. Over to you, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh. And once again, welcome everyone. We are happy to see you here joining us. Before I start with the predictions themselves, I would like to give a shout out to our research team, on which behalf I will be presenting the predictions today. It was a lot of hard work across the team that came to fruition making these. So without any further ado, let's start. The first prediction is about cyberspace becoming a live battleground with the rise in collaboration between state-sponsored threat actors and cybercrime. So, as we all know, the world is being divided between more or less NATO and its allies, and on the other side, Russia, China, Iran's sphere of influence. And in order to counter the well funded NATO alliance and its allies, the nations on the other side, which have few resources, are collaborating to strengthen their position, and that includes cyberspace as well. So for the Russia, recently Sergei Narishkin, the head of Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, noted that the relation between Russia and China's intelligence services are at the unprecedented level. Furthermore, Moscow is building relations with Iranian intelligence services, and Narishkin recently added that there are prospects for cooperation with Tehran. Coming to Iran and Iranian regime, they have decades of experience with evading sanctions, and they are equipped with an outsized cyber capability, which is likely to be drawn upon by increasingly isolated Russia. Additionally, researchers found links between North Korean hackers for hire groups and Russian nation state campaigns, which is worrying development. When it comes to China, Xi Jinping and the ruling CCP party have set to achieve their global supremacy ambitions. And with that in mind, CCP will have to access or reinvent the cutting edge chip manufacturing technologies. With that, it's believed that the current sanctions will set China's mastery of the technology back by at least a decade, which in turn pushes CCP to launch many cyber espionage and IP theft campaigns, aiming to steal or gain technology, defense, engineering, and research secrets or progresses. And when it comes to research, they are quite heavily aiming at universities as well. And to underscore this, it's no coincidence that 5 out of 24 members of the new Politburo have technology background, which is a big change compared to the previous establishment. Finally, we have already seen governments utilizing local cybercrime groups for their objectives. Russia has been famous for this, or rather infamous for this, for many years. So their ransomware gangs are most likely to start targeting specific industries, and when they exfiltrate the data in order to get the ransom or extort the victims, they are very likely to share this exfiltrated data with their respective governments, just in case there is anything of interest for them. So the takeaway here is that the international relations are deteriorating further. Uh, this is probably not going to change in 2023. We all hope it will, but it's not likely. And this will fuel the rise of the cybercrime even further. And attributing cyber attacks to threat actors will become even more difficult as the lines between nation states and usual cybercrime TTPs are getting increasingly blurred. Um, Yes, so with that in hand goes that investigating of ransomware attacks are going to be a lot harder, as the threat actors' motivation just will go way beyond just financial gain. So we will never know who's actually behind it with a degree of certainty in some cases. And we are also expecting possible development that the ransomware attacks might be used as a distraction tactics for the data exfiltration and intellectual property theft, similar to what we have seen in the past with the DDoS attacks, where threat actors have used DDoS attacks as a distraction to some more sinister cyber attacks or activities. So we have some numbers here to illustrate the trends. Last year, 63% of cybercrime had some state involvement, sharing infrastructure or TTPs provided by state actors. And in next year, we are expecting a further increase up to 75 or 80%. Moving on to second prediction, we are talking about cybercrime growing as a lucrative career path. It's no secret that crime pays, at least the cybercrime does. And the recent boom in ransomware attacks and the amount of revenue it generates has allowed for creation of trickle-down economy that has resulted in the growth of profitable niche cybercrime specializations, namely initial access brokers, traffickers spreading the malwares, and botnet herders, ransomware as a service, and so on. And this is further amplified by the entry of lower skilled hackers or threat actors who can acquire very advanced toolkits and thus are capable of successful attacks or on organizations even without in-depth knowledge, commonly referred to as script kiddies. So all this development and evolution clearly attracts new threat actors from around the world, and what we are seeing as a result of it is a significant increase in information stealers log selling across underground forums, telegram groups, and other confidential or private channels. And this indicates that information stealers are the most popular way of starting a cybercrime career. Furthermore, the economic downturn across the world, created by many events, including pandemic, ongoing war in Ukraine, and so on, has forced many people to turn to crime. And these days, they are more likely to resort to cybercrime over pocket theft in the streets. So it's a large contributing factor as well. So while the rise of low-skill attacks may not warrant much concern among seasoned cybersecurity professionals, they are actually ranked among one of the highest threats. We have seen many cases where a simple info stealer that someone downloaded from a random spray and pray phishing campaign ended in the ransomware attack on the organization. So to give you a specific example, if an employee has saved their work account credentials to their browsers, like the password managers, or using actual password managers as well, chances are they are going to open these on their personal computers or mobile phones as well. And if their devices are infected by one of these info stealers, all the credentials are stolen the very moment they open the manager. The info stealers are getting more and more advanced, and especially saving the credentials in browsers is becoming more and more insecure way to store them. At last, the accumulated, stolen, and leaked data by all these low-skilled attacks are being scanned, processed, correlated, and weaponized to collect intelligence on victims and craft spear phishing campaigns. We are seeing on underground forums trading hundreds of gigabytes of stolen data and databases, and threat actors are learning how to get specific information from them to target the specific organizations. So the takeaway here, once again, is the number of threat actors is exploding. Cyber criminals are pivoting from exploiting randomly collected credentials from info stealers to active collection and processing and hoarding data, pretty much, and using automation to process it, get what they want, and therefore, and after that, launch ransomware attacks or other more sophisticated attacks or organizations. And this goes beyond cybercrime. Also, nation state actors are doing the same thing. So once more, we got some statistics at the end. Last year, we have seen almost 200% increase in new subscribers and utilization of leak forums, dark web, and covered platforms. And this is most likely going to increase for another 250 or 300%, maybe even more from what I have personally seen on these underground forums. And next to it, we got hacking as a service forums activity has significantly increased by 300%. And we are expecting this to go up 1.5x in next year as well. Moving to predictions number 3, industrialization of cybercrime, innovation, and homogenization of TTPs. This is a topic that we have covered last year, and unfortunately or luckily, depending on your point of view, it materialized pretty much word for word. So cybercrime does keep industrializing in a sense that it's following kind of emerging industry startup procedures and trends, and they are forming a supply chain economy on its own. As mentioned before, there are initial access brokers, traffers, botnet herders, ransomware as a service operators, and affiliates. And all these groups are becoming highly specialized in their respective areas, and their business model is just simply strictly provide specific services to the other groups. So ransomware as a service, or rather their affiliates, they reach out to initial access brokers to get access, RDPs, VPNs, whatnot, and initial access brokers reach out to traffers to distribute their info stealers, and so on and so on. This kind of development also translates to certain degree of standardization for efficiency's sake. So the sharing of the data and tools between the groups is somehow uniform, so everyone can use it. And that, together with a general tendency to keep using whatever works well, 2022 saw a huge homogenization of TTPs. Specifically, after Microsoft disabled Office macros by default, pretty much everyone started using ISO and LNK infection chains, which were followed by Cobalt Strike and Mimikatz. If you work in incident response or forensics, you have seen pretty much 90% of the cases, at least with ransomware, included Cobalt Strike followed by Mimikatz. So such homogenization allows for focused development and fine-tuning of these TTPs, and also plausible deniability to nation-state threat actors, uh, which plays to their advantage. They don't want to be, identified or attributed, so they more and more often are using whatever the cyber criminals are using, together with the trend of nation-state utilizing their homebrew cybercrime groups to carry out their objectives. But since Cobalt Strike is so prevalent, the defense is not sleeping. The detection of it is improving. So what we have started to see at the end of the last year and going to this year is more frequent use of some alternative frameworks, namely Brute-Rattle C4, Sliver, Manjusaka, written in Golang, and recently, we have our own CYFIRMA research team has discovered Exfiltrator 22, which is another post-exploitation framework. So to finish with the takeaway, ransomware affiliates are regularly able to go from a beachhead to ransom network in less than 2 hours by using standardized playbooks. And with the ongoing automation revolution among threat adversaries, we will see a near instant lateral movement from initial access. And that translates for defenders that the usual 60 or 90 minutes SLAs that SOC analysts have or tend to have to mitigate threats are becoming too long. So it's probably a good time to evaluate these timings, try to make it as quick as possible as the threat actors are becoming faster and faster. Once more, we got some statistics at the end, and these are related to NFTs and cryptocurrencies as well. As you all know, probably NFTs and cryptocurrencies are heavily utilized by threat actors. They use it to launder their ill-gotten gains, and especially NFTs are riddled with scams and pump and dump schemes because they are not very well regulated. So all this also attracts and translates to the cybercrime activities and getting in high thousands returns on these investments. So if you are considering as a company, dipping your toes into NFTs, be very, very careful. They are really riddled with scam and cybercrime. Moving to number 4, information and cognitive warfare to intensify. This is related to previous point about geopolitical development. Last year has seen a major escalation of information warfare in cyberspace, where mostly authoritarian regimes continue attacking democratic elections and undermine democratic values, which is motivated by their ambition to control the narrative at home by pointing out flaws of democracy and the democracy processes and elections. In order to justify the iron-fisted rule at home, they can simply point out, hey, take a look at the United States and all the problems they are having around the elections. Whatever we have at home is as good or even better because we don't have these problems. And since all it takes to undermine public trust and create confusion is just to plant the seed of doubt, adversaries' jobs is simple in this area. The quantity over quality is a key strategy. Threat actors are betting on massive campaigns, spreading lies and deceits, the result of which is or are contradictory information, mixing together fake news with actual facts and half-truths. And it becomes pretty much impossible for people to recognize what's actually truth, what's real, and what is not. And that in turn creates a lot of distrust, apathy, or adoption of extreme belief in some cases, all of which are pretty much the desired effects of these campaigns. Most often, as you probably saw this yourself, they take root on social media or alternative news media, and very often are bolstered by botnet traffic. So, in case there is fake news and it has 1 or 2 likes and 1 comment, it's not likely to look very believable. So what these campaigns are doing, they are buying botnet traffic to get hundreds of or thousands of likes and traction and create the believability that people actually agree with this and give it the perception of being real news. And to make things even worse, the deepfakes technology for both voice and videos and also Photoshop are emerging and just creating overall more chaos and mistrust and fake news and whatnot. So this is just going to get worse as the deepfake technology is progressing in 2023, further amplifying the effectiveness. And also, there is a lot of money to be made through the clickbait headlines and controversial content online. And the huge online traffic these can generate has proven to be very profitable and will continue to be a major contribution to the spread of the misinformation and disinformation online. Um, Another big problem here is that there are quite limited ways how to fight back, especially when we are talking about democratic and free societies and states and nations, which generally want to avoid use state propaganda or censorship, but still are forced to respond in some way, and they keep making mistakes. Excuse me. They keep making mistakes while responding to these events. And it is a very sensitive issue, and any attempt to filter content online is usually perceived as undermining of the democratic values for which many countries have fought even in the recent history. So it's really difficult to come up with a solution how to filter out the fake news. And since any of these attempts usually create even more escalation of social tensions and divides, the best example of it is United States. The Republicans and Democrats, they are getting increasingly divided. It all plays into the hands of adversaries, unfortunately. And this issue is being talked through in the highest of places. So let me quote Michelle Bennett, the seventh United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Quote, when we debate the best ways to respond, we need to understand that censorship is not only an ineffective medicine, it can actually harm the patient. End of the quote. So in the highest places, they are discussing this, and they are also not seeing a clear way how to tackle this problem. So the takeaway here, the best way how to start is individual responsibility. So critical thinking and being responsible with what and how information is shared is a key to any stakeholder or decision maker. And for companies or organizations, trust and credibility are more than ever becoming the most valuable assets of any brand or organization. For statistics and some numbers, this is coming from independent research. About 80% of people believe their close family, close friends and family are the most trustworthy sources of accurate information, which shows a huge cognitive bias that we as people are hardwired to have. And which is being exploited. Further illustrated by the fact that 86% of the internet users admit actually falling for fake news. And those are the people who know it. There is many other people who don't know that they have consumed any. And 80% of people believe they have seen some fake news every day on social media. So these numbers are honestly terrifying. Moving on into predictions, prediction number 5, and following up a little bit with deepfakes. They are inevitably going to take over social engineering TTPs. And once more, we will talk about initial access brokers, since their specialization is to gain the initial access, and they are becoming more and more sophisticated and experienced with social engineering campaigns. They are developing new tricks involving long-term engagement, and even now possess the ability to bypass multi-factor authentication. At the same time, the deepfake technology is advancing rapidly, and this presents a threat actors with a whole new set of malicious techniques we are not really prepared for. An anecdotal just event that happened already back in 2022 A bank in Hong Kong acted on instructions from an executive through a phone call and made a $35 million transfer. But at the end, it turned out that the instruction came from a phone call made by deepfake voice modulation technology pretending to be said executive. So the threat actors are on this for years already, and they are learning how to utilize the advances being made with this technology. So the latest technology or the advances are made in real-time face swap. Many of you probably know this from social media apps like Snapchat or Instagram and so on. But usually they are to transform into some animals or funny avatars, but they are getting more and more better or getting just better at actually swapping faces and be believable. This we believe this is a threat, especially at the beginning to video calls and related social engineering. At the moment, it still requires quite expensive hardware to compute and pre-train the AI models and using at least somewhat similar looking actors to pull off. But in recent months, there has been multiple papers publishing new algorithms that are significantly improving both computation requirements and also the believability of the results. One of the new apps or algorithms rather is now able to create quite realistic talking heads from just a single high definition portrait, which are commonly shared of the executives, or rather the executives or other high value individuals have their portraits, online on LinkedIn or their own websites and whatnot. So they are easy to get. So slowly but steadily, we are approaching the point where a single high-end consumer graphics card in a desktop computer will be able to pre-train these AI models in matter of weeks rather than multiple months. And unfortunately, it will be just a matter of time before this technology reaches the maturity and the capability to impersonate people on video calls, which we believe will be one of the first attack vectors, because the low video quality on these calls is able to hide the deepfake artifacts, making the job of recognizing these a lot more difficult. So the takeaway here is that technology is coming, and similar to how we had to learn to spot social engineering in phishing emails, we will now have to prepare ourselves to identify deepfake tricks and also maintain situational awareness of these new and emerging tricks as they keep coming. So, combined with the weaponization of growing volumes of available information about individuals and organizations online, there will be a compounding effect that will present a growing threat in 2023 and way beyond. Once more, some numbers. Last year, we have seen 250% increase of deepfake techniques discussion in cybercrime communities, underground forums, and so on. And we have seen nearly 300,000 references to these techniques on set forums. Moving to number 6, rise of cybercrime syndicates and big game hunting ransomware. So in the past, we have seen formation of syndicates or cybercrime conglomerates, if you will, namely Revol or Conti. And their business model has turned to be exclusively focused on big game hunting. By big game hunting, we mean big enterprises, multinational corporations, and so on. And their size, meaning the size of these syndicates, allows them to conduct more complex and ambitious attacks than most of the ransomware as a service affiliates. As you probably know, the most prolific cybercrime syndicate going into the last year was Conti Gang. And before they fragmented, they acquired TrickBot botnet, which gave them direct control from initial access all the way to the extortion. And since Conti fragmented in the aftermath of leak incident and some of the key players arrested and sanctioned, their model still remained very successful, and we are seeing some other groups trying to follow the suit. And combined with the somewhat unreported effect of the war in Ukraine, Russia is fast becoming a pariah state where these hacking groups are now pretty much untouchable by any foreign law enforcement, creating the ultimate haven for these cybercrime syndicates. And as mentioned earlier, very often they are also, collaborating with the government itself as well. So to speak a little more specifically, the latest research on TTPs and reporting suggests the formation of another cybercrime syndicates, and we are basing this on similarities of Fin7 Group and Blackbuster ransomware group TTPs, which is quite worrying development. Another case we have is a recent interview with a member of group behind Ursnif banking Trojan, announcing switching to an extortion model and developing their own ransomware. They also indicated that they are aiming to own a complete kill chain loop utilizing resources they have acquired throughout the years of operating the Ursnif Trojan. All right, further, driven by the declining revenue from ransoming end users in the organizations in last year, we are seeing now the wider spread of ESXi ransomware, which is a virtualization platform or the most popular one on which many of the cloud backup infrastructure data is being stored. And in other words, the ransomware gangs are aiming to hit where it will hurt the most to force out the ransom. Since the ESXi deployment or environments rather are a lot more difficult or complicated to compromise than end user workstations and laterally move from those, it has been pioneered over last year or so, mostly by these largest cybercrime groups motivated by the large payouts doing the big game hunting. Excuse me. So another compounding effect, once again contributing, are the accumulating knowledge and experience, acquiring more advanced tool, building up the procedures and processes and systems and playbooks by these large cybercrime groups. And they are also adopting automation at scale. And overall, since they are sharing many of these tools out there on GitHub, for example, it keeps lowering the skill cap required to execute this sophisticated big game hunting, sort of another trickle down effect, if you will. So in turn, we expect more lower skill criminals to join this trend and give their shot at the big game hunting. And we expect, especially since the companies that have their end users network compromised are refusing to pay the ransom because they have everything backed up in cloud. We are expecting to see this most likely become a norm in near future. So another takeaway, the extortion-based business model is going to keep evolving. It's not going anywhere despite the positive news of declining revenue in next year, especially under the protection of the Russian government. There is nothing stopping formation of these huge cybercrime syndicates, which in turn is painting target on the backs of some of the biggest organizations out there. And for the numbers, we have seen a significant 460% increase in the big game hunting in last year compared to the 2021. And we are expecting this to triple in the next year as more tools are becoming available and the threat actors are learning. And once again, the ESXi ransomware is still being pioneered. It's not nowhere near of a mature kind of TTPs. Moving on, number 7, adversaries actively targeting open source code and supply chain. So, as we all know, the social engineering, phishing emails, and sort of thing, they are still pretty much the primary attack vector. But we are also seeing coming quite close targeting of open source repositories to deploy malware or inject malicious code into legitimate libraries. Open source code is often touted as a secure, as anyone can review it for bugs and vulnerabilities and can contribute to its hardening. But unfortunately, in the reality, due to the lack of funding, human resources, it is often neglected and left vulnerable. If some of you might remember Heartbleed many years ago, that was a textbook example of everyone using TLS, but no one really maintaining it, causing a huge problem for everyone. So Threat actors use number of techniques to introduce malicious code into the open source code. The most popular is typo squatting. It's also the easier to do. So they just disguise the malicious repositories as the popular libraries using the same name, just changing one letter like I to L and so on. And these libraries, the malicious libraries, are pretty much identical clones, just bundled with a backdoor or information stealer. Recently, the Python package index, PyPy, has been compromised with dozens of such packages. A little more sinister way to use is to use project contributions compromise credentials to inject the malicious code into the libraries. Or alternatively, the threat actors can propose a contribution that appears to be a fix of a bug or introduce a useful feature. And if approved, the pull request will just merge the new code into the main code and create a backdoor or vulnerability in the application or the source code itself. Excuse me. We are also looking at the significant uptick in the code theft and data leaks through open source. Most recently, company Okta, identity and access management solutions provider, has reported that their code has been stolen through a GitHub attack on their repositories. And as you can imagine, this is a gold mine for advanced adversaries having an access to the source code of, pretty much a tool that's taking care of all the access and credentials in the enterprise. Uh, most probably more vulnerabilities and attacks on Okta are going to come. And since it is such a gold mine, generally speaking, this is gaining more and more attention from advanced adversaries and nation states, especially when they are sitting somewhere on the supply chain of the products like remote access tools, RDP, VPN, and so on. So, takeaway is that threat actors keep scanning widely adopted open source projects for vulnerabilities and the GitHub repositories or other repositories of code for vulnerabilities and possibilities to inject their own malicious code. And also, after the disaster that was Log4Shell last year, you all surely remember, everyone is on an intense hunt for another golden ticket like that. And unfortunately, we expect them to see or find another one sooner or later. Moreover, exploiting open source code can result in large scale damages. Many supply chain products use code adopted from open sources. Once again, the example of Log4j, Log4Shell, and it is pretty much impossible to guess which one could be hiding another critical bug. For some numbers, we have seen a nearly 200% increase on supply chain attacks, and we are expecting another doubling the coming year. And cybercrime analysis or cybercrime forms analysis has seen 130,000 times mentions of open source modules, programs, APIs, and so on. And we expect this to go and double again next year. All right, moving on to number 8. Adversaries are automating using AI and machine learning in cybersecurity. And AI and machine learning, I will refer to it as AI and ML going further, have been very popular buzzwords in cybersecurity for a while. First, as a powerful technology for defense, and more recently, as a possible weapon in the hands of adversaries out there. The latter remains to be seen, but the recent mainstream popularity of ChatGPT has shaken things up a little bit, but not really in the sense that we have expected. We are still remaining skeptical about adversaries acquiring any kind of powerful AI that will be capable of hacking on its own anytime soon. The ChatGPT has demonstrated potential power or potential for abuse of AI and machine learning, specifically the power to use these public models to chain and automate tasks. We have already seen on the underground forum cyber criminals trying to use ChatGPT most commonly to find vulnerabilities in code and whatnot. But fortunately, at least for now, it still requires very high skill and knowledge of what people are looking for, because it's just a generative prediction text. It doesn't really do anything else than that. So if the person trying this out doesn't know how the code works, what to look for, it's not very useful. But it helps and speeds things up. So with that in mind, the cyber criminals are actually speeding up many of the repetitive tasks, especially in the reconnaissance and lateral movement. I mentioned Conti before. They have their leak incident, and one of the many interesting things there was a very detailed playbook for their lower level staff, if you will, on how to go from initial access to Cobalt Strike persistence, network discovery, and deploying the lockers themselves. And according to these leaks, dealing with these low level grunts in quotes is a major headache and waste of time and money for the higher ups in the gang. So automating these efforts and tasks has always been on the minds of these gangs and cyber criminals. But when it comes to AI and machine learning, we are seeing a lot more worrying trend, which comes with the growing adoptions of at least some kind of AI or ML across businesses. Excuse me. And across businesses and industries, which can present a very dangerous attack surface in next year and beyond. Uh, because what we have seen, recent research published some proofs of concept how to poison and compromise AI and ML models, forcing them to leak information similar to like SQL injections, if you will. It's not the same, but the overall approach is very similar. Or feed it fragments of malicious code that the AI then reassembles at their back end, and it's used to facilitate lateral movement or ransomware by planting a backdoor. And this is especially true for shared and open source libraries, of which there are unfortunately many. So this comes again back to the open source stuff. We have to make sure that these are properly maintained and secure. And that goes to the takeaway here, that the artificial intelligence and machine learning are very rapidly adopted by many organizations. And as history has shown, during any kind of quick adoption like this, security is seldom primary consideration. So we expect vulnerabilities to emerge at any point, and as usual, they will be very quickly followed by exploitation by threat actors. As for weaponization of the AIs themselves, threat actors are very active on the forums regarding this, but so far what we have seen, it's really just quite simple but effective way to automate and execute attacks faster. So for the numbers and statistics, as I mentioned, the cyber criminals have been using this for a while. We have seen in last year 300% escalations of this chatter and activities, and once again we estimate about a threefold increase in the coming year. And when it comes to ChatGPT and its capabilities, we have seen 2.3 million mentions on cybercrime and the language-specific communities on underground forums. Excuse me. Right. Moving to number 9, edge devices will be at the forefront of exploitation attacks. There are now estimated 18 billion IoT devices out there and about 1 billion of 5G connections. This represents an exponential growth in attack surfaces where lateral movement can take place from seemingly innocuous devices. For example, last year we have seen Chinese APT crawling through building automation systems into sensitive servers of organization renting the said building. Further, researchers have published a proof of concept to deliver a ransomware payload from some of the IoT devices out there, like CCTV cameras and so on, as well as exploitation of Amazon Echo to control other smart devices on the network, including the door locks. So this goes just beyond organization and industrial deployments. It also affects the smart homes and us on individual basis, including wearable devices. One of the most spine-chilling use case, in our opinion, is malware, which allows hackers or attackers to take control of cars through connected mobile apps and entertainment systems, which might create. Many years ago, there was a proof of concept actually stopping the engine remotely of, I believe, Jeep cars. So use cases like this are very, very concerning. Furthermore, this is a little bit of speculation, but wild scenarios like watering hole attacks on limousine service to compromise devices of high value targets like laptops and phones of executives through a bug in the limousine smart entertainment system could become a real threat. So, once again, devices that we have never thought about as potential attack vectors are now slowly and possibly becoming things to consider in our threat modeling. The problem with many of these devices starts with the development and design, especially when it comes to low-priced or cheap devices that are meant to be deployed en masse. They are often built on stripped-down versions of Linux and combined with a hot mess of stitched open source codes, as we already talked about, being often vulnerable. And a lot of these devices are all still being deployed and with default credentials, which is the cardinal sin of cybersecurity. But you would be surprised how many organizations and people are still keeping the default credentials untouched. Also, many of these devices don't have an option for patching. As they come, they will stay that way. And that makes them an easy target for widespread open source vulnerabilities like Log4j last year. It made millions of devices open to attack overnight, and many of them are still presenting a real threat. They are being compromised and used to execute DDoS attacks, or as we have mentioned, they could be used to, if the proof of concept will be any feasible, they can be used to deploy something more sinister like a ransomware. And not being, fear mongering, but unfortunately, it is what it is. Even the air gap systems are not being safe from attacks. We are seeing more and more proof of concepts and even some real case scenarios in the increasingly hostile cyberspace where adversaries are able to successfully attack this underexplored attack surface. Some of the methods are including exploiting of power supply radiation, LAD emissions, CPU electromagnetic waves, and most commonly DNS misconfiguration, because even if the network is air gapped per se, it might be still connected somehow through DNS or something to the wider network, and that is definitely an attack vector. Granted, many of these techniques require some expensive and sophisticated devices, but if the nation state hostilities in cyberspace are going to escalate any further, when there is a motivation, there is always a way. So, takeaway, IoT devices, especially wearables and home devices and other smart features in offices, are raising some serious privacy concern, as the personal and sensitive information can be easily weaponized. Should they be breached or leaked, or they can serve as a pivoting platform for further lateral movement. And systems that have never been considered a cybersecurity threat or threat in the cybersecurity modeling are now suddenly becoming vulnerable attack surfaces. As I mentioned, new office spaces loaded with cutting edge features can turn into liabilities and being riddled with vulnerabilities that are way too costly to patch, because removing all the electricity, all the features in the building is very expensive endeavor. So for some numbers, last year we have seen a 104% increase in the attacks targeting the edge devices. And once again, we are unfortunately expecting this to double or maybe even more in 2023. And finally, 10th and last prediction, counterattack will gain acceptance. So with the heating up in the cyberspace, the current trend landscape, and so on, many CEOs, CISOs, and even government officials have been increasingly feeling powerless when simply adhering to purely defensive measures to protect their organizations and networks. and they are frankly being tired of being sitting ducks. So they are beginning to fight back and explore options how to do that. For example, deploying decoy documents and lure services to trap the attackers. Typically, these are set to simply cut off the attackers as soon as they are being touched by them, and as soon as they touch these environments, and trigger an alert in the monitoring tools. However, there is a new development in this growing area of cyber defense, and these decoy documents and lures can be loaded with counter-attack measures to just not trap and stop the attackers, but also gather some of their information, reveal their IP addresses if possible, or other identifiers, which in turn can be shared with law enforcement to make their job a little easier to hopefully get these people and hold them accountable. Moreover, on the nation state level, Japan, among other many other states, has announced that they are bolstering their cyber defense, which includes the possibility of counterattacking. Similarly, the EU and its nations are working on defining steps how to disrupt the cybercriminal networks in their cyber diplomacy toolbox. We are expecting to see counter cyber attacks increase, mainly through some proxy organizations and hiring of mercenary hacking groups. Famously, or rather infamously, China has been known to utilize the North Korean mercenary hacking groups for years, but there are many others which can be utilized for this by groups or parties on both sides of the fence, west, east, north, south, everyone can do it. So the takeaway here, in the next year, we are expecting more actors in cyberspace to engage in reciprocal cyber attacks, the result of which are pretty much unpredictable, unfortunately. Only one thing seems certain, that any escalation will lead to more and more aggressive cyber attacks, which in turn will further drive proliferation of cyber weapons and mushrooming boutique shops making tools like mercenary spyware. I'm pretty much sure that most of you have heard about Pegasus, the no touch, no click iOS spyware. So tools like this are more likely to keep popping up. And lastly, especially for the businesses, cybersecurity regulations are very likely to increase as the governments are working towards getting their businesses, which are more often than not critical to local economy and also, geopolitical objectives and whatnot. So they want them to become more cyber astute. Therefore, they will force some policies and procedures, which are in turn going to force increased spending on cybersecurity programs. And numbers for the last one. We have seen last year at least 27 counterattacks publicly mentioned by nation state, and analysis on underground forums has indicated that the cyber criminals are asking who were behind the major hacks. And this is a bit unfortunately worded that not just cyber criminals are inquiring, just individuals, let's say, and behind many of these usernames are very frequently nation state intelligence operators asking these questions. And all these conversations or similar ones have occurred over 700 times on these underground forums. So from that, we are inferring that there is a significant interest in counterattack campaigns. We are also seeing some rewards going up all the way up to nearly $2 million for finding targets in the adversary nations. Once again, these are nation state operatives or intelligence operatives asking the cybercrime underground hacking communities to help them out, carry out their objectives as a proxies. And that's it. Time for questions if there are any.
Fantastic, Thomas. Thank you for giving everybody a deep dive into the top 10 things that we need to look out for and the reasonings behind them. Now, the meeting chat has been open all the while, and there have been some questions around certain opportunities. We look forward to working with some of those folks out there. But if there is anything else, do reach out to us at CYFIRMA. You can also download the detailed report from our website. We're all here to help realize the potential by consuming ETLM insights and making it a cornerstone of your cybersecurity strategy and cyber posture management. If there is nothing else, we thank you everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing the interaction. Thank you, everybody.